There are people who spend their whole lives trying to make the world feel lighter, trying to control what other people say, trying to avoid disappointment, trying to arrange everything so perfectly that nothing hurts, nothing shakes them, nothing slips out of place. But the more a person tries to armor the outside world, the more vulnerable they become on the inside. Because the truth is uncomfortable but freeing, you will never stop the world from touching your life. There will always be delays, criticism, ingratitude, loss, unfairness, noise, pressure, goodbyes, change. What can truly change is not the world. It is the way you receive the world within yourself. And this is exactly where Epictetus enters with astonishing force. Not with empty promises, not with pretty lines for you to repeat in the mirror, but with a philosophy that is sharp, clean, and powerful. A philosophy that does not treat you like a victim of fate, and not like someone who needs to be protected from everything. It treats you like someone capable of becoming inwardly free. And when that freedom begins to appear, something changes for good. What used to crush you starts to lose its grip. What used to control you begins to meet resistance. What once felt unbearable now meets a mind that is steadier, clearer, and stronger. When most people hear the phrase, "Don't let anything affect you," they imagine someone cold, distant, emotionless, almost like a statue. But that is not what the Stoics meant. They were not trying to turn a human being into stone. They were trying to take away the power of emotions to rule the soul. They wanted to teach you how to feel without drowning, how to think without torturing yourself, how to live without being dragged around by every gust of wind. It is not about becoming numb. It is about refusing to become a prisoner of what you feel. Epictetus knew what he was talking about. He did not teach from the comfort of an easy life. He spoke from the experience of someone who understood, in a brutal way, that the most important freedom is not freedom of the body, not freedom of status, not freedom of money, not freedom of applause. The most important freedom is inner freedom. The ability to keep your direction, even when life seems determined to pull you in 10 different directions at once. And maybe now, more than ever, that lesson feels urgent, because we live surrounded by stimuli fighting for our attention every second. One opinion can ruin a day. One ignored message can poison a whole evening. One nasty comment can echo in the mind for hours. One silent comparison on social media can steal your peace. One small mistake can become a crushing weight. And without realizing it, your inner life ends up in the hands of chance, in the hands of other people's moods, in the hands of whatever happens outside of you. Stoic philosophy arrives like a call to reclaim command, a call to return to your center, to realize that there is a place within you that can remain intact even when everything around you feels unstable. That place is not born finished. It is built, it is trained, it grows stronger through daily practice. And that is exactly what we are going to walk through here. The Stoic principles Epictetus left behind, so that nothing or almost nothing can affect you the way it used to. But one thing needs to be clear from the beginning. These principles are not mental tricks. They are not magic phrases. They are not quick techniques to numb pain. They demand honesty. They demand repetition. They demand the courage to look at yourself and admit this. Much of the suffering that dominates me does not come directly from what happens, but from the way I interpret what happens. And that admission, as uncomfortable as it is also the beginning of freedom. Because the moment you realize interpretation plays a role in your suffering, you also realize you are not completely trapped. There is a space between what happens and your reaction to it. At first, that space is tiny, almost invisible. But that is where philosophy lives. That is where training begins. That is the place where a human being stops being someone who merely reacts and starts becoming someone who chooses. Epictetus wanted to teach you exactly that, to stop living like a leaf blown around by the wind, to stop handing your piece to every person, every headline, every inconvenience, every opinion thrown your way. He wanted to form strong people. People who do not break over every little thing. People who carry inside themselves a kind of moral order, a quiet stability, a strength that does not need to make noise to be real. So as we move through these principles, do not think of them as distant ideas from the ancient world, beautiful only on paper. Think of them as tools for ordinary days, for traffic, for frustration, for pressure, for fear, for irritation at home, for anxiety at work, for feeling misunderstood, for those moments when life seems to be testing you on purpose, because that is the greatness of Stoicism. It was not created to impress. It was created to sustain. It was not meant to decorate speeches. It was meant to strengthen souls. And among the great names of that tradition, Epictetus may be the most direct of them all. He does not tell you to dream about a perfect life. He tells you to become strong enough to live any life with dignity. That is the real point. The goal is not to make sure nothing bad ever happens. The goal is that when it does happen, you do not lose yourself. The goal is that chaos does not enter your heart as easily as it used to. The goal is that little by little, you learn how to remain whole. And it all begins with the most decisive principle of all, the distinction that can change an entire life, the invisible line between what is up to you and what never was. Stoicism Epictetus said that some things are in our control and some are not. This may be the most famous idea in Stoicism, but it is also one of the least practiced, because so much human suffering grows from confusing those two realms. We suffer trying to control other people's behavior. We suffer trying to control the past. We suffer trying to control what others think of us. We suffer trying to control the exact outcome of our efforts. We suffer trying to hold on forever to things that, by nature, are temporary. The first real strength of a Stoic mind appears when it finally accepts this division. What is up to you? Your judgment, your intention, your choices, your character, your response, your effort. What is not up to you? Other people's reactions, recognition, luck, perfect health in every respect, the weather, the traffic of life, the exact way things unfold. When that difference becomes clear, a great deal begins to fall into place. Picture someone who works hard, stays committed, does the best they can, but spends all their time anxious about approval. They want to be praised. They want to be noticed. They want to be validated. The effort belongs to them, but the opinions of others do not, and that is exactly where peace begins to leak out. Because when you place your emotional stability inside something that belongs to the world and not to you, your peace becomes hostage to it. Epictetus does not tell you to stop acting. On the contrary, he tells you to act better, but with the right focus. Do what is yours with excellence, yet do not make yourself sick trying to own what was never yours. That is a quiet revolution, because it changes the reason you act. You stop acting only to get a certain response from the world, and begin acting out of loyalty to your own character. That is the first principle. Concentrate your energy on what truly depends on you. It sounds simple, but it changes everything. In an argument, for example, you may not be able to control whether the other person is fair, but you can control your tone. You can control the clarity of your words. You can control the decision not to humiliate yourself in order to win. You can control the moment you choose silence. You can control the choice to leave without carrying poison with you. In a loss, maybe you cannot prevent the pain, but you can keep the pain from becoming self-destruction. You can choose not to add rebellion to what is unavoidable. You can grieve with dignity. You can remember that sadness is not weakness, but blind rage is a form of slavery. In a crisis, maybe you cannot change the storm, but you can decide what kind of person you will be while the storm passes. And that changes everything, because it gives back to you the most important part of your life, your inner direction. The second principle grows almost like an extension of the first. It is not events themselves that destroy you, but the judgment you make about them. This idea is so powerful that if you truly live it, it changes the way you see your own mind. What happens out there is one thing. The story you create inside yourself is another, and very often it is that story that multiplies the pain. A criticism, for example, may simply be a criticism, but your mind adds, "So I have no value. Nobody respects me. I always ruin everything. This proves I'm not enough." Notice what happens. The event was one thing. The interpretation manufactured several more. Now you are no longer suffering only from what happened. You are suffering from a whole inner script your mind wrote around it. Epictetus wants you to watch that transition. The moment a fact turns into a story, the instant a first impression tries to present itself as the absolute truth. He would say, "Wait. Do not immediately accept everything your mind puts in front of you. Not every impression deserves your trust. Not every thought deserves obedience. Not every emotion deserves the throne. That takes training, because the human mind is fast. It judges before understanding. It concludes before observing. It accuses before investigating. And when you live that way, every small event swells into something enormous. A delay becomes rejection. A silence becomes contempt. A mistake becomes proof of inadequacy. A stumble becomes your identity. But when you learn to place awareness between the event and the judgment, something opens up. You begin to ask, what actually happened? What am I adding to it? Is this interpretation fair? Is it final? Is it useful? Is it true? Those questions alone start to weaken the impulse, because emotion loses speed when it runs into clarity. See how this applies almost everywhere. You make a plan and it falls apart. The mind quickly says, "My life never works out." But the Stoic looks and replies, "No, one plan fell apart. That is all." You speak to someone and they seem cold. The mind says, "I'm a burden, I'm not wanted." The Stoic replies, "No, they seem cold, everything else is assumption. You make an important mistake." The mind says, "I'm a failure." The Stoic replies, "No, I made a mistake. That does not exhaust who I am." It is remarkable how life becomes lighter when you stop turning events into verdicts, because a verdict traps you. A fact can be worked with. A verdict closes the door. A fact still allows movement. A verdict becomes a mental prison. A fact can become a lesson. The third principle comes right after that. Learn to pause before you react. That pause may look small on the outside, but inwardly it is immense. It is the moment you interrupt the automatic slavery of impulse. Someone provokes you, and instead of answering in the same tone, you hold back. Bad news arrives, and instead of panicking, you breathe. Fear appears, and instead of chasing the first desperate solution, you observe. That pause is a form of power. Whoever reacts instantly is often being led by the stimulus. Whoever can pause recovers themselves. Epictetus understood that freedom does not first appear in grand heroic moments. It appears in these tiny choices. In the second, when you could explode and do not. In the moment when you could start explaining yourself frantically and do not. In the point when you could degrade yourself just to be accepted and do not. The Stoic pause is not passivity, it is not cowardice, it is not avoidance. It is mastery. It is the decision not to let the first impulse rule your conduct, and that matters deeply in the modern world, where everything is instant, everything demands an immediate response, everything invites reaction, and almost nothing invites reflection. How many relationships would be spared if people knew how to pause? How much pain would be smaller if someone breathed before sending the impulsive text, before returning the insult, before making a decision under humiliation, before turning one bad moment into a permanent disaster? The pause seems small, but it changes destinies. Epictetus teaches that you should say to appearances, "Wait a moment, let me see what you really are." That line is precious, because it shows that not everything entering your mind deserves open access. You can examine it, you can question it, you can slow it down. That small delay already weakens a great deal of disturbance. The strong person is not the one who never feels the impulse. It is the one who does not kneel before it, the one who recognizes anger rising, fear rising, vanity rising, the hunger for approval rising, and still chooses not to hand over the wheel. And the more you practice that, the more you realize that peace does not depend only on what happens, but on how quickly you allow yourself to be captured by it. The fourth principle touches a wound a lot of people carry. Do not wait for the world to confirm your worth. This is one of the quietest vices of the soul. Dependence on approval, the constant need to be validated, praised, recognized, understood, celebrated. As long as that rules you, every opinion becomes a threat. Every rejection becomes an earthquake. Every indifference becomes humiliation. Epictetus would say that a person like that has placed their peace in the hands of strangers, and that is serious, because it means they no longer belong to themselves. Their mood rises and falls with the temperature of applause. If they get attention, they feel alive. If they are ignored, they collapse. If they are praised, they bloom. If they are criticized, they feel erased. That is not freedom. That is emotional dependency disguised as sensitivity. The Stoic looks for a different foundation. He asks, am I acting according to virtue? Am I being just? Am I being honest? Am I being steady? Am I doing what is mine to do? If the answer is yes, then that already has value in itself. External recognition may come or may not, but it cannot be the foundation of your dignity. Think about how liberating that is. You stop begging for approval in places where it was never going to be stable. You stop building your self-worth on other people's preferences. You stop bending yourself too much just to avoid displeasing others. You stop trading away your truth for scraps of acceptance. That does not mean becoming arrogant or ignoring advice. It means you do not confuse other people's opinions with the measure of your value. Praise does not make you greater. Criticism does not make you smaller. What truly defines you is the quality of your soul in action. Everything else is noise, sometimes pleasant, sometimes cruel, but still noise. When that understanding matures, your behavior changes. You speak more honestly. You work with more focus. You love with more truth. You leave places where you had to shrink yourself. You remain silent where you once would have over-explained. You stop trying to convince everyone of who you are, because you are no longer trying to exist inside other people's eyes. You are trying to live rightly inside yourself. The fifth principle is hard but necessary. Accept the impermanence of everything. Nearly every deep emotional upheaval has something to do with this. We are disturbed not only because we lose something, but because at some level we behaved as if it would last forever. As if people, seasons of life, positions, relationships, comfort, youth, stability, health, and even certain versions of ourselves were permanent. But they are not. Epictetus wants you to look at this reality without panic and without fantasy. Everything in the visible world is subject to change. Everything. People leave. Seasons end. Bodies age. Relationships shift. Plans fall apart. What feels solid today may already look different tomorrow. And resisting that law inwardly does not stop the change. It only adds rebellion to what is inevitable. Accepting impermanence is not loving less. It is loving with clarity. It is not becoming indifferent. It is becoming grateful without illusion. It is looking at everything you have and recognizing, this is precious, but it is not mine forever. And strangely enough, when you understand that, you begin to value things more, not less, because presence is no longer treated like a guarantee. Some people only recognize the value of something after they lose it. The Stoic tries to recognize it sooner. He trains the mind to remember that every meeting is fragile, every routine is temporary, every comfort may be passing. Not to live in anxiety, but to live awake. Not to cultivate fear, but to cultivate depth. This changes the way you deal with disappointment. Instead of saying, this should not have happened, you start saying, this belongs to the nature of the world. Instead of living like someone betrayed by reality, you live like someone who understands reality. The pain still exists, of course. Stoicism never denied that. What it removes is the arrogant surprise, that secret expectation that the world was supposed to obey our attachments. And there is a very practical consequence to this. When you accept impermanence, you stop building your peace on things that are changing all the time. You stop staking your stability on circumstances, people, and possessions as if they were eternal. You begin to look for something deeper, more reliable, more inward. The sixth principle is one of the most transformative in everyday life. Do not personalize everything. Very often, when someone is emotionally exhausted, there is too much personalization going on. Everything feels like it is about them. The other person's silence is about them. The other person's bad mood is about them. The lack of response is about them. Criticism becomes absolute proof against them. Someone else's mistake feels like a direct attack. And so life turns into a chain of wounds, many of them imagined. Epictetus dismantles that trap. He reminds us that people act according to the ideas they have, the limits they carry, the state they are in. Much of what hits you was not truly done against you. It was simply done out of someone's ignorance, lack of self-control, selfishness, confusion, or pain. That does not excuse everything, but it explains a lot. Because when you understand that other people's behavior comes from their own inner world, you stop absorbing everything as if it were a verdict about you. Someone's rudeness may simply be rudeness. Someone's indifference may simply be inability. An unfair criticism may simply be projection. And when you stop turning everything into a personal attack, the world stops feeling like a constant war. How many times have you suffered from interpretations you rushed into? How many times was someone just busy, tired, distracted, or struggling with their own inner battles, and you concluded it meant rejection, contempt, or humiliation? Excessive personalization magnifies pain. It puts you at the center of situations that often do not revolve around you at all. The Stoic asks instead, is this really personal? Or am I making myself the main character in something that belongs to the other person's inner struggle? That question alone prevents a huge amount of unnecessary pain, and it also restores humility. Because sometimes it is not about you. Sometimes the other person is at war with themselves, and you are simply seeing the smoke. This also helps you respond more wisely. Because when you do not personalize everything, you react with more intelligence. You do not jump into every provocation. You are not offended so easily. You do not treat every difference as a threat. You do not need to win every conversation. You do not need to correct every tone. You learn to distinguish what deserves a response from what deserves distance. The seventh principle is almost like an invisible shield. Stop demanding that life be comfortable in order for you to remain dignified. A lot of people can only stay balanced when everything feels the way they want it to feel. If the day goes smoothly, they are fine. If they meet resistance, they fall apart. If they receive affection, they feel strong. If they meet indifference, they feel empty. If work praises them, they feel energized. If it pressures them, they crumble. That fragility has a source, the habit of tying your stability to comfort. Epictetus teaches the opposite. He shows that a person's moral quality reveals itself precisely when comfort is absent. Patience becomes real in frustration. Self-control proves itself in insult. Courage moves from speech into life in difficulty. Detachment stops being theory in loss. For the Stoic, discomfort is not just a problem. Often it is a training ground. This changes your attitude toward hard days. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What virtue is this moment asking of me?" That question is powerful because it removes you from the role of victim and places you in the role of practitioner. It does not mean enjoying suffering. It means using the occasion to strengthen what comfort never strengthens. A long line can become training in patience. An unfair criticism can become training in self-control. A delay can become training in adaptability. A loss can become training in depth. A hard day can become training in inner endurance. And suddenly life, instead of being nothing but a series of irritating obstacles, also becomes a moral school. This principle may be one of the most forgotten today because almost everything around us teaches the opposite. The culture says, eliminate all discomfort, run from anything that frustrates you, leave any environment that asks maturity from you, move away instantly from whatever disturbs your feeling of well-being. But a life built that way may look pleasant on the outside, while producing fragility on the inside. And a fragile soul suffers far more than a trained one. The Stoic does not go looking for pain, but neither does he worship comfort. He does not measure the value of life by the absence of difficulty. He measures it by the kind of human being he is becoming as he passes through difficulty. That creates a more adult kind of stability. You stop thinking a bad day means a bad life. You stop thinking difficulty is proof of abandonment. You stop behaving as if reality owed you constant softness. The eighth principle is this: take care of what you feed your mind. At this point, many people imagine Stoicism only speaks about major tragedies, but it speaks just as much about everyday mental life. about repeated impressions, about cultivated thoughts, about invisible habits that slowly shape the soul. Because in many ways, you become what you repeatedly permit yourself to think. If every day you feed resentment, comparison, fear, fantasies of revenge, the need for approval, feelings of inferiority, your mind will lean toward those things more and more easily. And then you wonder why everything affects you so much. But how could it not, if inside you there is already fertile ground prepared for disturbance? Epictetus would insist on something simple and demanding: guard the gate of the mind. Do not let every thought walk in and settle like the owner of the house. Question it, filter it, refuse what weakens your reason, choose what strengthens your character, because a repeated thought becomes an inclination, a repeated inclination becomes a habit, and a habit eventually starts to look like personality. This includes the environment you consume, the conversations, the content, the examples, the voices you listen to often. A soul surrounded by shallowness tends to lose depth. A mind flooded by comparison tends to lose serenity. A heart that lives on scandal tends to lose silence. The Stoic seeks inner hygiene, not in the sense of living isolated, but in the sense of not allowing the chaos of others to set up permanent residence inside him. He learns to select more carefully what reinforces him. He learns to notice when a certain company lowers him, when a certain habit agitates him, when a certain kind of exposure makes him more anxious, more vain, more reactive. And little by little he cuts away what weakens his stability. This matters especially because many people believe they only need to respond well to big events. But it is the small daily inputs that either prepare your mind or disorder it for those big events. Someone who lives scattered, comparing themselves to everyone, filled with noise, chasing validation all the time, arrives emotionally exhausted at the first serious problem. Someone who cultivates inner order, presence, and standards arrives far more intact. In the end, there is no emotional strength without mental discipline. You do not build a steady soul by letting every thought grow wild. An untended garden quickly fills with invasive weeds. The mind does too. The ninth principle may be the most demanding of all: accept reality before trying to change it. That may sound strange at first, because many people confuse acceptance with weak resignation. But Stoicism is not talking about giving up. It is talking about seeing clearly, and you can only act well upon what you have first seen as it is. What disturbs us is often not only the pain of a fact, but the inner refusal to admit the fact. The relationship ended, but the mind keeps negotiating. The mistake happened, but pride keeps denying it. The limit has arrived, but vanity keeps pretending it has not. The other person changed, but attachment keeps demanding the old version. This war against reality exhausts the soul. Epictetus would say, start with what is, not with what you wanted it to be, not with what would feel more comfortable, not with the fantasy that pleases you most, with reality. That is where freedom begins. As long as you keep fighting the finished fact, there is no energy left to act wisely. You stay trapped in the stage of denial, and whoever lives in denial lives behind their own life. Acceptance is not liking something. It is recognizing it. It is not approving. It is seeing it clearly. It is not abandoning the desire to improve things. It is stopping the waste of energy spent pretending that what exists does not exist. The person who accepts reality becomes stronger because they stop fighting two wars at once: the war of the event and the war of resisting the event. Think of how much suffering grows from that second battle. The body shows signs of exhaustion, but the person keeps treating themselves like a machine. The relationship has become toxic long ago, but the person clings to the illusion that everything will go back to how it was. Work has already lost all meaning, but fear blocks honest recognition. Grief has arrived, but the soul wants to act as if nothing has been taken away. All of this stretches pain out longer than it needs to last. The Stoic begins differently. He says, this is what is in front of me now. From here, how do I act with dignity? That posture brings almost immediate relief because it replaces fantasy with sobriety. And sobriety, while not always sweet, is deeply liberating. Once acceptance is in place, action improves. because now you are no longer responding to illusion, but to reality. This applies to money, the body, relationships, work, age, emotional limits, and loss. No one truly matures while demanding that life confirm their wishes. Maturity begins when you stop arguing with what is and start working with it. And that leads into the 10th principle, the one that crowns all the others. Make virtue your highest good. This is the heart of Stoicism. Not comfort, not fame, not approval, not pleasure, not control over events. Your highest good is the moral quality of your soul, the justice with which you act, the courage with which you endure, the temperance with which you govern yourself, the wisdom with which you choose. When you understand this, life reorganizes itself, because what once looked decisive begins to lose weight. If someone despises you, that hurts, but it does not touch your highest good. If you lose money, that affects life, but it does not touch your highest good. If a plan fails, that frustrates you, but it does not touch your highest good. Your highest good remains something no one can take from you without your permission, your character. This is the true independence taught by Epictetus. He does not promise that no one will hurt you. He shows you that no one can degrade your soul unless you cooperate. No one can turn an injustice done to you into an injustice done by you unless you choose to answer in the same spirit. No one can make you vulgar on the inside without your consent. No one can make you cowardly, dishonest, petty, or servile except through your own concessions. See the depth of that. A person who lives this way becomes much harder to shake, because the measure of their life is no longer entirely outside of them. They do not need a perfect setting in order to remain whole. They do not need applause in order to remain upright. They do not need ease in order to remain disciplined. They do not need to be understood in order to remain noble. That is why the Stoic does not ask only, "What do I get from this?" but also, "What kind of person do I become by doing this?" That question changes relationships, decisions, habits, business, friendships, and ambitions. It changes how you win, how you lose, how you speak, how you stay silent. And little by little, life stops being driven by passing impulses and begins to be guided by a firmer moral center. Now, when we gather these principles and bring them into modern life, we see how alive they still are. At work, for example, how much anguish comes from trying to control what is not yours to control. Other people's evaluations, office politics, the timing of promotions, exact recognition. Stoicism does not tell you to abandon excellence. It tells you to separate excellence from emotional dependency. Do your best. Improve. Correct yourself. But do not hand your worth to other people's judgment. In relationships, the teaching is just as deep. How many conflicts come from reacting too quickly, from personalizing everything, from demanding constant comfort, from living under the illusion of permanence? Someone says something sharp, and the other person immediately doubles the force. A silence becomes a fantasy of abandonment. A difficult season becomes proof that love is gone. A necessary boundary becomes a personal offense. Without inner training, love itself becomes a place of disturbance. Epictetus brings maturity to that. He reminds you that you do not control the other person's heart, only the integrity of your own. That you should not humiliate yourself in order to be loved. That you must learn to distinguish facts from projections. That you must love without possessiveness, care without becoming a slave, and remain dignified even when the other person fails. This does not make love cold. It makes love less desperate. In everyday anxiety, the application is almost immediate. A great deal of anxiety comes from trying to predict and dominate the future. The mind wants guarantees. It wants certainty. It wants to know that nothing will go wrong. It wants to protect you from all risk. But since that is impossible, it keeps spinning. Stoicism breaks that cycle by bringing you back to the only place where action is possible, the present and your own conduct. What depends on you now? That question is worth more than many mental spirals. Not the whole month, not next year, now. What is the lucid action of this moment? What thought does not make this worse? What is the next honest step? When you learn to live like that, the future loses some of its power to kidnap you. You remain responsible, careful, attentive. But you are no longer emotionally kneeling before something that has not even happened yet. On social media, these principles can feel almost medicinal, because few things affect people today as much as constant exposure to the gaze of others. Comparison, the need for approval, resentment, reactivity, vanity, the feeling of inadequacy. All of it finds fertile ground there. The mind gets used to measuring its own worth by outside response, and the more it does that, the weaker it becomes. The Stoic does the opposite. He returns to an inner standard. He does not use other people's gaze as the final court of appeal. He does not treat the appearance of someone else's life as truth. He does not let himself be ruled by likes, silence, display, and instant validation. He knows that the world's performance is often just that, a performance, and that the soul needs depth, not an audience. In pain, these principles do not erase suffering, but they prevent its corruption. That is important. There are pains that are unavoidable. Grief, loss, disappointment, illness, farewell, betrayal, failure. Stoicism never said the wise person feels nothing. What it proposes is that even while feeling, you preserve your center. That pain does not destroy your clarity. That suffering does not turn into moral disorder. That sadness does not persuade you to abandon dignity. And that may be the most beautiful image in Stoicism. Not the person who never falls, but the person who, even while fallen, does not surrender to the worst within them. The person who cries without degrading themselves, who loses without hating themselves, who is criticized without losing their axis, who is wounded without becoming nothing but a wound, because in the end, that is what Epictetus is teaching. He is teaching you not to confuse yourself with what happens to you, not to turn circumstances into identity, not to let one moment say everything about who you are, not to let the injustice you suffer determine the quality of the justice you practice, not to let another person's ignorance steal your moral intelligence. And all of this takes repetition. No one wakes up invulnerable. No one reads one profound idea and becomes stable. The Stoic path is a path of training. Every day, life will hand you opportunities to practice. Someone will oppose you. Something will go off plan. Some expectation will fail. Some emotion will demand the throne. Some appearance will try to deceive you. And in those moments, instead of thinking you have failed because you are being tested, you can remember, this is exactly where philosophy begins to matter. Not in silence alone, not only in beautiful moments of reflection, but under pressure. In the sentence you choose not to return. In the humiliation you refuse to absorb as a definition. In the waiting you refuse to curse. In the loss you refuse to let shatter you completely. In the fear you refuse to let make you abandon yourself. So, if you truly want to live in such a way that nothing can affect you with the same violence it once did, start here. Give yourself back the government of your inner life. Not everything that touches you deserves entrance. Not everything that happens deserves to dominate your day. Not everything other people say deserves to become truth inside your mind. Not everything you feel deserves to become a decision. Look again at the principles we walked through. Separate what is up to you from what is not. Question your interpretations before surrendering to them. Pause before reacting. Do not turn approval into a vital need. Accept impermanence without bitterness. Stop personalizing everything. Use discomfort as training. Guard what you feed your mind. Accept reality as your starting point, and above all, protect virtue as your highest good. These principles do not promise a life without impact, but they promise something more valuable, a life without inner submission. The world will still try to pull at you. Loss will still hurt. Criticism will still come. Injustice will still appear. Fear will still knock at the door. Only now, you will not be as defenseless as before. There will be, between you and the chaos, a stronger awareness, an axis, a discipline, a presence. And maybe that is what so many people are really searching for without knowing how to name it. Not a perfect life, not a life without sadness, not a life without contradiction, but a life in which the soul is not dragged around by everything. A life in which there is a firm center. A life in which you can say with calm, that circumstances will not be the only thing deciding who you are. Epictetus does not want you to run away from the world. He wants you to stop being ruled by it. He wants you to move through existence as someone who feels but does not dissolve, who acts but does not become enslaved to outcomes, who loves but does not get lost, who suffers but does not become degraded, who lives in the end with a rare kind of freedom. That freedom does not make noise. It does not need to prove itself. It does not depend on a stage. It appears when you endure provocation without losing proportion. When you accept a delay without surrendering your peace, when you hear criticism without turning it into poison, when you recognize a mistake without turning it into a life sentence, when you realize that you do not control the world, but you still control the way you inhabit your own spirit, and little by little, almost without noticing, you become someone much harder to wound, not because you became cold, but because you became deeper, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped blindly obeying what you feel. Not because the world became gentle, but because within you a strength appeared that was not there before. That is what Stoicism offers to anyone who practices it for real. Not a mask of toughness, not a performance of superiority, but the patient construction of inner solidity. A way of living in which your value does not rise and fall with applause, your peace does not depend on convenience, and your heart is not so easily handed over to disturbance. If there is one image to keep from all this, keep this one. Life will always send winds, some soft, some violent. You do not control the wind. You never did. But you can strengthen the root. You can care for the trunk. You can deepen the center. You can stop living like a loose leaf and start living like a tree. And when that root finally grows deep, the world remains the world, but it no longer finds you the same way. Because from that point on, what defines you is not what happens to you. It is the strength with which you answer it. Nothing is more stoic than that. Nothing is freer than that. And few victories are greater than this one, to remain whole even when life tries to scatter you.